Hello, it's Laura, and I am sharing through the book of John. This is John chapter 5. All right, so what we have is in John chapter 4, Jesus was sharing the gospel, was pointing to himself being the Messiah in a very practical way. And then here, when we get to chapter 4, Jesus is still sharing the gospel, but it's in a much more intellectual way. So basically, what happens is he leaves Samaria and he comes to this pool of Bethesda where there's a ton of people who need healing, a bunch of sick and diseased people around this pool. And Jesus seeks out this man who is laying there and says, "Do you want to get well?" And he heals the guy, and then he sneaks away into the crowd. He comes back to the guy later and says, "Don't sin anymore, because worse things can happen to you or will happen to you." And because of that, then the Pharisees are looking for who the Jews, the leaders are looking for, who was this guy that healed you, because it was the Sabbath. No, you're just, a no to heal people on a Sabbath. And so they're looking for Jesus. And then Jesus, comes back to the person. Basically, because they start persecuting Jesus at that point, because he presents himself as God. The way that he communicates is when he's saying in verse 17, "But Jesus responded to them, 'My Father is still working, and I am working also.'" So when Jesus said, "My Father," usually they would use the term "our Father." So when he used by that, it was clear in that culture in that day that he was claiming to be equal with God the Father. And the Jewish leaders understood that, and therefore they started off, condemning him for working on the Sabbath, and then it really turned into a charge of blasphemy, and that's why they started persecuting Jesus. So that's what happened. This is his third, as far as we know, his third time that he performed a third sign healing the sick, even though in John 20 it talks about many other things Jesus also did that are not written in these books, because we wouldn't be able to read all of them if they were written down. So anyway, this is the third that is written down that we know about. And we learn so much about God's heart and character. Okay, one, he's not afraid of people, all right? He's not afraid of what people think. Jesus is not afraid of how people will respond, or he's not afraid of persecution. He is bold, and yet he doesn't trample all over people. He is caring and kind and pursues people even in the midst of their sin. All right, this guy, his disease was a result of sin. All right, not all diseases are. Not all, we can see in other times when they're not a result of sin, but it's for the glory of God that they have a disease or sickness. But in this case, it was a result of sin, and yet Jesus pursued him anyway. All right, we could see that he pursues people. He came back to him. He pursued him the first time. We can see that he lets what he does be known. He takes ownership in front of all of the Jewish leaders. He let it be known what he did. And he is the one that gives eternal life. There is so much to be seen about Jesus in John chapter 5. And the things that stood out to me, principles that stood out, is one, that guy who's healed and was pursued by Jesus twice, he didn't actively seek a closer relationship that we know of, a relationship with Jesus. All right, so that's a principle, is we often can get distracted by seeking the good gifts that God gives instead of seeking him, the giver. That we can be distracted by the blessings God gives and forget that it's really not about the blessings. We get our eyes on other things, and it takes our gaze away from the one that is really supposed to enamor us and that we're supposed to be enamored with. And we need to be the ones to put our eyes on Christ. Okay, another principle is when the basic needs of mankind, which are to love and to be loved and to feel worthwhile to self and others, when those aren't met, people can't really see or recognize their need for anything else. He says, do you want to be well? That's like the main thing in his life, but he couldn't even recognize it. All he could recognize is there's nobody with me. I'm alone. All right. And that is the deepest need of mankind. So here Jesus meets the deepest need by helping him get up and walk, that he can have relationships in his life. All right. Another principle is if we're only taking an interest in people to correct them, it's an indication our heart is not in the right place with God, because Jesus took an interest in the guy to heal him, whereas the Jewish leaders took an interest in that same guy just to correct him and point out his flaws and what he was doing wrong. Another one is often persecution spreads the gospel. Often persecution leads to opportunities to share the gospel, so we really shouldn't be as afraid of it as we are. And then the last principle that stood out to me is Jesus is deliberate in his timing. Okay, there is so much hope built into this because it was the Sabbath. Jesus could have got there a day earlier. He could have waited and come a day later, and he could have seen that guy and rested and hung out and chilled out for the night and then healed the guy the next day. But he was deliberate to get there when he got there. All right, and that same deliberate Jesus is the working in our lives. Like his timing is not a mistake. So often it's like, oh, we're waiting on the Lord, like waiting for him to do something, when really he is doing something and we're just, it's not his time for something to be unfolded or whatever yet. It just takes a while for his plan to unfold. So he is deliberate in his timing, and that gives so much hope. So for me, personal application is just to keep my eyes on Jesus, no matter what faces me, whether persecution or the blessings and amazing gifts of God, to not be distracted by either, but to keep my eyes on him, to fix my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and for the joy set before him. So that is my application. I'd love to hear, what do you get out of chapter 5? What stands out to you when you read it? What do you see about God's heart and character? And how can you apply it to your life? Let me know in the comments below.